You know those moments when everything seems just a little too perfect? That was me last summer. I was house-sitting for my aunt in her charming little cottage nestled deep in the woods. It was meant to be a peaceful getaway, a chance to recharge and get some much-needed solitude. Little did I know, it would turn into a nightmarish ordeal that still sends shivers down my spine. The first few days were blissful. I spent my mornings reading on the porch, afternoons hiking through the woods, and evenings cooking up simple meals in the quaint kitchen. The isolation was a welcome change from the hustle and bustle of city life. But then, one night, things took a sinister turn. It was around midnight, and I was curled up on the couch, engrossed in a thrilling mystery novel. The silence of the forest outside was occasionally broken by the chirping of crickets and the rustling of leaves in the gentle breeze. Suddenly, the power went out. Now, this wasn't entirely unexpected. My aunt had warned me about the occasional outages in the area. I grabbed a flashlight from the coffee table and decided to head to be Dearly. As I made my way upstairs, I heard a faint knock on the front door. My heart skipped a beat. Who could be visiting at this hour and in the middle of nowhere? I cautiously approached the door, peering through the peephole, but all I saw was darkness. I hesitated, considering whether to open it. My gut told me to ignore it, but curiosity got the better of me. I unlocked the door and opened it a crack. "Hello?" I called out, my voice trembling slightly. No response, just the deafening silence of the night. I was about to shut the door when I noticed something on the porch, a small, old-fashioned lantern. It wasn't mine, and it definitely hadn't been there earlier. I picked it up, puzzled, and closed the door, locking it tightly behind me. Back in the living room, I inspected the lantern. It was covered in rust, clearly very old, and seemed to have been out in the elements for years. But why was it left on the porch? As I turned it over in my hands, the power suddenly flickered back on, startling me. I dropped the lantern and it clattered to the floor. The lights revealed something even more unnerving, muddy footprints leading from the door to the living room window. I froze. Someone had been inside. I quickly checked the locks on all the windows and doors, ensuring everything was secure. My mind raced with possibilities. A prank? A burglar? Or something worse? I tried to shake off the paranoia and went to bed, but sleep didn't come easy. Around 3 a.m., I woke up to a strange noise, a rhythmic tapping, like someone knocking on the window. My bedroom window. I didn't dare move. The tapping continued, slow and deliberate. I mustered the courage to peek out from under the covers, but all I could see was the dark silhouette of a tree outside. The tapping stopped, and after what felt like hours, I finally drifted back to sleep. The next morning, I decided to leave a day early. I packed my things and headed for the door, but stopped dead in my tracks. The lantern was back on the porch, right where I had found it the night before. But this time, there was a note attached to it, written in shaky, almost illegible handwriting. "Stay out of the woods." Chills ran down my spine. I didn't need any more convincing. I got in my car and drove away, not looking back. To this day, I don't know who or what left that lantern or why they wanted me out of the woods. But one thing's for sure, sometimes reality is far scarier than any fiction. Did the midnight knock and the old lantern on the porch send chills down your spine? If you're captivated by eerie encounters like this one and crave more spine-tingling tales, make sure to hit the subscribe button and stay tuned for more. Everyone loves a good ghost story, right? You know, the kind that makes you question every creak and groan in your house, the kind that makes you sleep with the lights on. This is one of those stories. It happened to my friend Sarah, and to this day, she swears it's the reasons he refuses to live in an apartment ever again. Sarah had just moved into a new place. It was a cozy little apartment in an old building downtown, the kind with character. You know the type. High ceilings, large windows, and that unmistakable vintage charm. She was excited about the move, her first place on her own after college. It was the beginning of a new chapter. Her first night in the apartment was uneventful. She spent the evening unpacking, arranging furniture, and settling in. As she drifted off to sleep, she felt a sense of accomplishment and peace. But that tranquility was short-lived. Around 2 a.m., she was jolted awake by a loud thumping noise. It sounded like someone was pounding on the walls. Groggy and annoyed, she figured it must be the neighbors. She tried to ignore it and go back to sleep, but the noise persisted. It was relentless. Finally, she got up and went to her front door, ready to give whoever it was a piece of her mind. But when she stepped into the hallway, everything was silent. No more banging, just the eerie quiet of the building. She stood there for a moment, listening, but there was nothing. She shrugged it off and went back to bed. The next few nights followed a similar pattern. Sarah would fall asleep only to be awakened by the same loud thumping. It seemed to be coming from the apartment next door, but every time she checked, the hallway was empty. She mentioned it to the landlord, who looked puzzled and assured her that the neighboring apartment was vacant. Vacant? Sarah felt a chill. If none lived next door, where was the noise coming from? She began to feel uneasy, but she tried to rationalize it. Old buildings make noises, she told herself. It's just settling. One night, the noise was louder than ever. It sounded like it was right on the other side of her bedroom wall. Desperate for sleep, Sarah decided to investigate. She grabbed a flashlight and went out into the hallway, determined to get to the bottom of it. She stood in front of the door to the supposedly empty apartment, and after a moment of hesitation, she knocked. "Hello, is anyone there?" she called out. No response. She tried the door, and to her surprise, it was unlocked. Heart pounding, she pushed it open and stepped inside. The apartment was dark and empty, just as the landlord had said. But something felt off. The air was heavy and there was a faint, musty smell. She shone her flashlight around, illuminating bare walls and dusty floors. Nothing seemed out of place, yet the feeling of being watched was overwhelming. As she turned to leave, the door suddenly slammed shut behind her. She spun around, flashlight beam dancing wildly across the room. In the dim light, she saw a figure standing in the corner. It was a man, tall and gaunt, with hollow eyes that seemed to bore into her soul. He was just standing there, watching her. Sarah's blood ran cold. She stumbled backward, her flashlight falling from her hand and clattering to the floor. In the darkness, she fumbled for the door handle, yanking it open and bolting out into the hallway. She didn't stop running until she was back in her apartment, the door securely locked behind her. She called the landlord immediately, her voice shaking as he recounted what had happened. He arrived within minutes, and together they went back to the neighboring apartment. But when they opened the door, the room was empty. No sign of anyone, no figure, no ghostly presence. Just an empty, silent apartment. The landlord looked at Sarah skeptically, but she knew what she had seen. She didn't sleep a wink that night, and the very next day she began looking for a new place to live. She moved out within a week, leaving the haunted apartment and its sun-seen neighbor behind for good. To this day, Sarah insists that what she saw was real. And who knows, maybe it was. Sometimes the things that go bump in the night are more than just our imaginations. Sometimes they're a reminder that we're never really alone. Every road trip has its stories, the ones about amazing discoveries, unexpected detours, and the occasional breakdown in the middle of nowhere. But my friend Mark's story is different. His road trip tale is one that still gives mech ills every time I think about it. This is the story of the disappearing hitchhiker. It was the summer after our sophomore year in college, and Mark decided to take a solo road trip across the country. He wanted to clear his head, see EU places, and have some adventures. He packed up his old beat-up car and set off, ready for whatever the open road had in store for him. For the first few days, everything was great. He drove through small towns, visited roadside attractions, and camped under the stars. But as he made his way through the Midwest, things started to get strange. One evening, as the sun was setting, Mark was driving down a long, deserted stretch of highway. The sky was a brilliant orange fading into purple as night approached. He hadn't seen another car for miles, and the solitude was beginning to feel a little eerie. That's when he saw her, a young woman standing by the side of the road, thumb out, looking for a ride. Mark slowed down and pulled over, rolling down the window to ask if she needed help. She looked to be in her mid-20s, with long dark hair and a pale complexion. She wore a simple dress that seemed out of place in the modern world, almost vintage. "Can you give me a ride?" she asked, her voice soft and almost pleading. Mark hesitated for a moment. He had always been told not to pick up hitchhikers, but something about her seemed different, vulnerable, maybe even scared. He nodded. "Sure, hop in." She climbed into the passenger seat and thanked him. As they drove, she introduced herself as Emily and explained that she was trying to get to a town a few miles down the road. She didn't say much else, and Mark didn't press her for details. There was something haunting about her presence, a kind of sadness that hung in the air. They drove in silence for a while, the only sound the hum of the engine and the tires on the asphalt. Eventually, they reached the town Emily had mentioned. It was small, with just a few buildings and a single gas station. Mark pulled over to let her out, but when he turned to say goodbye, she was gone. The passenger seat was empty. Mark's heart pounded in his chest. He hadn't heard the door open or close, and there was no way she could have just disappeared. He got out of the car and looked around, but there was no sign of her anywhere. It was like she had vanished into thin air. Confused and a little freaked out, Mark decided to stop at the gas station to see if anyone had seen her. He described Emily to the attendant, an older man with a weathered face who listened patiently. When Mark finished, the attendant nodded slowly. "You're not the first one to see her," he said. "That girl you picked up, she died on this highway over 20 years ago, hit by a car while hitchhiking. Folks around here say she still tries to get home." Mark felt a chill run down his spine. He couldn't believe what he was hearing, but the more he thought about it, the more it made sense. The old-fashioned dress, the way she seemed so out of place, her sudden disappearance. It all pointed to one thing: Emily was a ghost. He left the gas station in a daze, driving on autopilot until he found a motel for the night. He couldn't shake the image of Emily's sad eyes and the thought that she was still out there, somewhere, trying to find her way home. The rest of Mark's road trip was uneventful, but he couldn't stop thinking about that night. When he got back home, he did some research and found an old newspaper article about a girl named Emily who had died on that stretch of highway. It confirmed what the gas station attendant had told him. To this day, Mark swears she'll never pick up another hitchhiker, and honestly, who can blame him? Sometimes the stories we hear on the road are more than just tales. They're reminders that some souls never truly find peace. If you want to see more horror stories, check out my next video.